So should we communicate our culture publicly and formally, such as having a poster in the break room? Absolutely. But when we do, we've got to recognize that it serves not just to communicate what the culture is to employees, it also creates an accountability standard. It sets the bar for everyone, particularly the leadership. So what are ways you can assess yourself on this truth? One is ask, how well are your managers and other leaders in the organization modeling your culture? What are the disconnects that exist between what you say about culture and what actions are occurring? And there's always some. And then finally, how do you hold managers accountable for complying with your culture? Let's now look at the fifth truth, which is culture is never benign. Unlike very famously neutral Switzerland, culture is never benign. It's never a neutral influence. Instead, it creates either lift or drag. Never let yourself believe that because you don't have a culture, you're not impacted by its possible negative effects. Well, of course you have a culture, and it is impacting you in some way. So there are degrees to the positive or negative impact depending on the strength of the culture or the level of organizational dysfunction that may exist. But culture's impact is always felt. Strong, healthy cultures, they're a powerful, unifying influence that can lift an entire organization. Leaders that know this invest very heavily in time to personally model and communicate the culture, ensuring that it links to their vision and the company's values and that it permeates every aspect of the organization. By contrast, organizations that neglect culture often have a poor one. No surprise there. When culture is a low priority, leaders may fail to realize that their culture is dragging the entire organization down and limiting its success. So what are some assessment questions you can ask about this? One, how is your culture generating lift for the organization? You should be able to find and identify specific examples. And two, how is your culture creating drag on your organization? Again, if you can't find examples, your employees can, and they will tell you if your culture allows them to. Let's look at the next truth, and that is culture differentiates. Culture differentiates through the impact it has on employees, and that impact, positive or negative, is clearly felt all the way down to the customer level. Companies with strong, healthy cultures, they earn greater loyalty from their employers who have high morale, they love working for the brand, and they willingly will go the extra mile to serve your customers and to serve each other. Customers feel that. They feel and value the difference. Those companies have recruiting advantages because they're the preferred employer and they compete very effectively for talent because of that culture. Never has this been more important than right now. The cultural outcome for these organizations is a highly talented, highly motivated, engaged workforce that delivers the best possible customer experience. In this way, companies with these great cultures, they get a major and sustainable competitive advantage that sets them apart. The inverse, unfortunately, is true. Companies that experience low employee morale, but nevertheless expect employees to joyfully face customers with a smile and provide outstanding customer service, that's just being unrealistic. So how can you assess yourself on this? Well, here are 3 questions you should ask. And one is, what's the state of employee morale and how do we measure that? That's a really good indicator of whether or not you have a good culture. How does your employee attrition rate compare to that of the industry? If you have a strong, healthy culture, you should have one of the lowest attrition rates. And who is the preferred employer in your market area? And you want to find out so you can use the answers to these questions as indicators to where you need to focus on improving your culture. Let's look at the 7th truth around culture, and that is changing it is hard. Culture is kind of like personality. It's pretty deeply ingrained in the organization and the people who curate it. Changing the culture, even just subtly, it's hard because it requires attitudinal change. Hard for me. I don't know about you, but that's hard for me. Then it requires repetitive communication to educate and to justify why you're making those changes. Then leaders have to consistently model those changes to everyone, and that takes time. It's not a fast process. Think of any major personal changes you've made in your life or you've seen someone else make, such as changing religions or switching political parties. Those kind of changes usually don't come easily or quickly, and it's the same with corporate culture. Great leaders have awareness of when the culture needs to change, and they initiate that change. Ineffective leaders, they often see no need to change the culture, even while everyone around them recognizes the dysfunction. When that happens, middle managers can try to create what I call a cultural oasis inside of their departments, but it's hard for them to fully insulate their teams from the negative effects of the culture outside the department because it surrounds them. So the hard truth is when culture is bad and it needs to change, often it requires installing new leadership. So here are some assessment questions you can ask around this truth. Is current leadership a catalyst or a barrier to healthy cultural change? And how is culture introduced into tactical and strategic decision making? Let's go on to the last truth I want to share with you, and that is culture can't be built in a day. Culture can take years to build, but just a day to destroy. So just like the images on this screen, today's strong culture is the mighty oak tree that 20 years ago was an acorn. We nurture it for years, but through recklessness or carelessness, it can come down in just a day. The mission to build and reinforce culture is a constant, ongoing leadership initiative. The CEO can't expect to give just one speech to the troops and think that culture building is mission accomplished. It requires daily effort. Managers should use culture as a filter for the things they say, for the things they do. Living out the culture has to occur in the big decisions for sure, but it's just as important in the small ones. Modeling the culture in this sustained, consistent way is how culture becomes real over time. Even a single cultural lapse by management can set the organization back, requiring damage control and culture rebuilding. Management giving cultural lapses a pass. You know, when someone has a cultural lapse and they just overlook it, that's one of the worst things you can do. That is fundamentally, using this metaphor, swinging the axe at the base of the culture tree. So what are some assessment questions on this truth? How do leaders consistently and frequently model the culture? How are employees recognized for being great cultural ambassadors? And how often do cultural lapses occur? And when they occur, how do they get dealt with? All very important questions to ask and answer. All right, so let's talk about indicators of a healthy culture as we wrap this discussion up. I've got a list here, and every single one of them makes sense. Trust, empowerment, transparency, accountability, grace. If you go back to the beginning of my presentation, the CEO email example, there was no grace in that example. Employee loyalty and customer satisfaction, all of these, when they exist, and by the way, these can be measured, indicate cultural health. So what do you do now? Because most organizations look at their culture and they go, we have some work to do. And truthfully, most organizations do. I've created an assessment tool that you can access online. You will see on the screen a shortened link that will take you to the cultural assessment tool that I've created. And I encourage you to go out there and take it. It's completely confidential. No one will know what organization you're with or your identity, but the score will tell you something. So you can see in the bottom part of this slide the range of scores. If you score between 75 and 100, that's a strong, healthy culture. You can see the other ranges there all the way down to if you score less than 25, that would be very concerning. You have more cultural drag than lift. So I encourage you to go take this assessment and just see where do you fall on the spectrum of healthy to dysfunctional. There's some other things you can do. So there's the link again on the screen. It's the same link that'll get you into that assessment tool. When you take that assessment tool, you can look at the outcome and identify some specific areas for improvement. Something else that I think every organization should do, one is you should establish a set of metrics or KPIs that help you understand, that indicate what your culture's like. For example, what's your level of customer satisfaction? There's a direct link between satisfaction and a healthy culture. What about customer churn? What about employee churn, engagement, and attrition? All of those metrics start giving you glimpses into what your culture is doing for you or to you. I think another great exercise, periodically go out and look at reviews left about your organization, places like Glassdoor. And I think Indeed also allows employees to leave reviews about places they've worked. Sometimes they're hard to read, but you need to read them, because collectively doing all these things will help you understand what your culture is really like and where you need to focus. Finally, I make myself available to help organizations improve their culture. So if you want to talk more about it, you want to go through your assessment, you need some additional analysis, some coaching or consulting or a workshop, please reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen. I hope you found this helpful, and I would love to hear from you. Thanks.